I haven't slept 1 minute since I've been out of prison.
I'm free to live life. I'm free to start over.
It was a sudden and celebrated release from a Pennsylvania prison.
I feel great.
Philadelphia received a $3.5 million MacArthur grant and has since reduced its number of inmates from 8,082 to 5,180. That's 36% in just 2 years.
It's been 1 year since Louisiana's historic criminal justice reforms became law. The Louisiana Department of Public Safety and Corrections says it's seeing positive results.
The Office of Returning Citizens helping those out of prison find jobs and pathways to life outside.
I paid my debt to my society, to my family, my friends, and now I'm giving back to my community.
The governor of Oklahoma signed 7 bills into law, each reform the state's criminal justice system. Governor Mary Fallin was surrounded by women who know the good having help and a second chance can do.
I've learned the tools to be able to deal with life on life's terms, and now I have my whole future ahead of me, and the only reason that I do is for having a second chance through Women in Recovery and bills like this.
The philosophy that more police officers, tougher prosecutors, and bigger jails equal a safer city has failed. Our driving goal shouldn't be to hire as many officers as possible, but to reduce the number of times we have to call police in the first place.
San Francisco Board of Supervisors President London Breed announced legislation to eliminate criminal justice fees.
They're counterproductive, problematic sources of revenue borne on the backs of our most vulnerable populations in San Francisco, and we're not having it anymore.
The New Jersey state legislature passed a bill to abolish cash bail for most nonviolent defendants.
Governor Phil Bryant has signed a bill that will require Mississippi officials to study sentencing disparities and juvenile detention and mandate that courts can't imprison people for failing to pay fines they simply can't afford.
D.C. police now mandate this new training, which includes a tour of this museum, which compels officers to explore Black history in such a way that it reduces tension on the streets between police and community.
You look at past history, you don't want to repeat the same mistakes again.
Governor Wolf signed the Clean Slate bill into law this afternoon. It's a law he says will give millions of Pennsylvanians a second chance. Previously in Pennsylvania, people had to go to a judge to ask for a low-level record to be removed from public view. This bill automatically seals that record without any action required.
People can make a change. They make a change for themselves. They make a change a lot of times when they have a family. They have children depending on them. That's what's important to them. They want a good life.
Alice Johnson was released from federal prison Wednesday.
This is the greatest day of my life. I cannot, my heart is just bursting.
As you can see, there's a lot happening around the country. And the next series of presenters are those who have centered their work around principles on smart on crime. From a data scientist to a book publisher, these innovators are making the justice system more fair, just and proportional, comprehensive, and based on data and evidence. We're going to kick this segment off with a media organization that is a must-read for everybody who is listening to me now and beyond. To highlight a story from the past year, actually this past month, we're going to welcome the Marshall Project to the state. How many of you read the Marshall Project? Yeah. And if you don't, you need to. So please welcome staff writer Alysia Santo and the president of the Marshall Project, Carroll Bogert.
Was there somebody who didn't clap who isn't reading the Marshall Project? Now, come on. So I'm Carroll Bogert. I'm the president of the Marshall Project, and this is Alysia Santo, one of our crack reporters. We were asked to give an overview of the year in criminal justice, which of course is impossible. You'll notice that that video just now, I think, did a good job of looking at disparate trends, many different things that are happening across the country. If you did read the Marshall Project, you would know from our morning newsletter that new federal statistics show crime remaining at near historic lows. If we can't make progress on criminal justice reform in this environment, we just must not be doing our jobs. But the real issues that we see are, of course, at the local level, and both now with Alysia and in a couple of hours with another crack reporter for the Marshall Project, Joe Neff, we're going to be looking deeply at a couple of local issues. Alysia looked at the issue of victims' compensation. I should say I was asked recently in an interview, whose voice did I think was really not being heard in the criminal justice conversation? And just for fun, I asked our newsroom at one of the editorial meetings, who do you all think is not being heard in the criminal justice conversation? And practically every reporter answered the same thing, which was victims. They didn't feel that victims were really being heard in our current debate. And Alysia, you chose to take a deep dive into an issue concerning victims. Why did you make that choice?
I've written a lot about a lot of different aspects of the justice system, and I had never myself tried to investigate the ways that victims receive services and whether there is disparities in the way that those services are handed out, including compensation. So a classic thing we do in journalism is follow the money or follow where the money does not go. And so I'd never really seen a really comprehensive investigation of compensation programs, which basically they reimburse crime victims for costs they incur, such as a funeral expense or a medical bill. And so that was what drew me to the topic.
And we have so you looked at 7 states that deny victims compensation if they themselves have some form of criminal record?
Yes, yeah, so very specifically states that bar people with a criminal record who have completed whatever the criminal justice system told them they had to do. So there are other states that also deny people on probation or on parole, but we looked only at the 7 states that deny people simply because of a conviction, and we zeroed in on Ohio and Florida, which have some of the most restrictive laws in the country and bar hundreds of people every year for this reason.
And I think you have a couple of stories of specific individuals who kind of elucidate the broader problem.
Blank. There we go. Yeah, so using public records, I did a first of its kind analysis basically of who receives victim compensation and who is denied for criminal records only. So we built databases using letters and denial letters and people's applications, and recently the federal government started requiring that they also collect race of the victims. So using these records, I was able to find a few people we really focused in on the story who were denied this help. The first I'll talk about is this man to the left. His name is Anthony Campbell. His dad was murdered in 2015, and he applied for help from the state of Florida to help him pay for the funeral. And he was denied because in 1983, his dad had been convicted of burglary. He basically tried to break into a building and ran away, is what the police records show. So because of this, it took him 3 years to pay off all the funeral costs, and his dad's grave remained unmarked for all those years, and that was really, really difficult for him. So we focused on him, and we also focused on Antonio Mason, who's his picture's next to his, and he was hit by a drunk driver when he was 23. Applied for help from the state of Ohio for his bills and was denied because when he was 16, he'd been convicted in juvenile court. He'd been adjudicated delinquent of drug trafficking. And so he always was told his juvenile record wouldn't follow him into adulthood, but it did, and it cost him a lot in his future, and he's also in a lot of financial trouble because of this.
Can you say a little bit about what it was like to try to wrest the records from states that did not necessarily want to give them up? We have an editor at the Marshall Project who likes to say the criminal justice system does not like to give up its secrets. And a lot of what we do is file Freedom of Information Act requests and otherwise importune officials to give up what they know and what should be publicly available to our reporters. I should add that our editor, Bill Keller, likes to say about Alysia used to have the office right outside Bill's door, and he said he could listen to Alysia talking to officials on the phone and just never giving up. He said he came to pity the people she was talking to because Alysia gets her man, or her statistics, as is the case here.
I gotta get my records. Yeah, we fought really hard for the records, especially in Ohio. It was a long process. It took over a year to complete the process. with lawyers getting involved. But that's one of the things I think it's really important about journalism is we got to know what's actually going on, and the only way to do that, if the state itself is not going to analyze what they're doing, then we need to analyze it. And so, yes, we built a database for Ohio actually out of the paper records, and it did take a really long time to actually find a request that was going to be deemed kind of legal. They don't have to do research for you, is what kept a lot of our requests from getting fulfilled. Yeah, that's a really important part of what we do, because with that we were able to say some things about the victim compensation programs in those two states that I'll just get to now. It's kind of hard to see this, but let's see if I can get this thing to work. See this line at the top here? This is what we're looking at in Florida, how long between a conviction and the person's later victimization, how many years had passed where people were getting denied for that old conviction. And you can see it was impacting black applicants at much more disproportionately in Florida, and the longest period of time we found was 60 years. A guy who had been denied compensation in 2015 for something he was convicted of in 1955. So we would never have been able to do that without records and analyzing the records that we got. And so that speaks to, I think, something that is important for people to know, that that's actually what's occurring.
And do you want to talk about how racism is effectively compounded in the system even without individual decision-making to deny people victims' compensation?
So these policies in most places aren't discretionary. So it's not that someone is sitting there seeing the race of the person and then making a decision using that information. It's anybody with a criminal record is denied. It doesn't matter your race. It just so happens that, as we all know here, that certain communities, black communities, are policed differently and treated differently at every other level. And so then when it comes to this level, when they're actually a crime victim, these policies ban them and keep them from getting help that other people would get. And so, yeah, that's the way it sort of works. It's not necessarily a person sitting there and making a discretionary decision. I mean, one thing just to add to that is, so these are the outcomes we found in Ohio and Florida. Just looking at, we could see that 42% of applicants in Ohio were black crime victims, with 61% being denied for a felony only, no other reason. Were also black, and then the disparity was even worse in Florida. And these policies come from really weird places. In Ohio, it was a mobster in the 1970s. His car got blown up and he died. And his wife got $50,000 from the Victim Compensation Fund, and that was how this policy started in Ohio. So they come from odd backgrounds. Yeah.
And say a little bit about the legislation that the Attorney General in Ohio, who's actually running for governor, has introduced.
Yeah, so while we were reporting this story, the Attorney General office, they drafted a bill to change this policy in Ohio. It was introduced last month. And it would lower the number of years in Ohio from a 10-year look-back period, which is what they currently do, to 5 years. So it doesn't get rid of the law. Actually, we found the median time length that had passed in Ohio was 3.9 years. So a lot of the people would still be caught up in the policy. But that was a small measure they took, or that they're trying to take. It's not clear where the bill will go.
It's probably worth knowing that the Attorney General of Ohio introduced this legislation after Alysia had spent many months pestering his office for these records. I also wanted to point out, this is the Marshall Project story, which appeared on the front page of USA Today, which is read in its print version, they say, by 7 million people every day. It's a very, very, very large newspaper in the United States. In addition, it was a podcast from Reveal, which is aired on about 400 stations nationwide. And in addition, it was, the story ran in 20 local newspapers that are part of the Gannett network that USA Today is part of, including newspapers like the Cincinnati Enquirer in Ohio, where we felt it was important that this story be seen and heard. As you know, the Marshall Project, we're reporters. We're not advocates like some of you, but we intend our reportage to be useful to all of you, and hopefully in efforts to make change in the criminal justice system. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.
We'll be back a bit later.